I think DragonBall Sparking Zero is a pretty good game. I've enjoyed my time with it, and I definitely don't regret buying it, but I think it suffers from one massive problem, being that the game just doesn't really feel finished. Of course, this is a game review, so I'm going to talk about this at length later, but first, as always, I want to give a little bit of context to my experience with the game before launch. So I've never really been a fighting game player, nor really an online game player, to be honest. The only game I've ever really consistently played that's an online game is Overwatch, and the less said about that, the better. However, I am an absolutely massive Dragon Ball fan, so even though fighting games aren't really my jam, I've been excited to try this game ever since it was first revealed. I've never played any of the Budokai Tenkaichi games either, so this review is going to be a completely unbiased one, as I don't have any of the nostalgia from these games that I imagine a lot of people who were hyped for Sparking Zero had. We're going to be breaking this video up into a few segments. First, we're going to individually cover each of the game modes, being the story, the PvP, oh god, and also the custom battles. Then, we'll talk about the overall aesthetics of the game. You know, like the graphics and the music, you guys are smart cookies, you know what I'm talking about. Then, we'll finish up with my closing thoughts about how Dragon Ball Sparking Zero was so close to being one of the greatest anime games of all time, and how I think the game just needed a little bit more time to cook in the oven. Sound good? Because if it doesn't, I literally do not care. I'm the one making this video, not you. But if you do disagree with something I say, you should write me a heartfelt comment explaining your opinion, and I'll give it a little heart. Even if you literally do nothing but just shit talk my video. Don't worry, I'm into that shit. Okay, first segment of the video, let's go! So Sparking Zero has been out for roughly a month-ish now as of writing the script, and it's pretty well known at this point that the story mode is sort of mid. Like, extremely mid, to be honest. Also, before we keep talking, story spoilers, I guess, for anyone that cares. So the way it works is that you have various characters from the Dragon Ball series, with each of them having their own playable story. And the story is pretty much like just a retelling of the Dragon Ball story, which we all know about. Except it's from each of their own perspectives. You can play as Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Trunks, Frieza, Goku Black, and even Jiren. But the reason these storylines are considered mid by most players isn't because the actual story of Dragon Ball is mid, because it's just not. It's pretty swag, honestly. The real problem comes with how it's being told. Let's just use Goku's story as an example here. So the story beats are all laid out on this super big map, with you progressing by clearing nodes. These nodes are usually just a super brief story section, and then a fight between Goku and whoever he needs to fight. Notice how I didn't say super brief story cutscenes, because what shows barely qualifies as a cutscene. These things 50% of the time are just PowerPoint slides with some really awkward animation, with the other 45% of the time being actual cutscenes, but these are usually just a bunch of characters all standing in a circle with some really awkward mouth movements and completely still poses. To talk about these two things really fast, none of the characters actually have proper blend shapes or shape keys set up for their mouths. They only have expressions like smiling or yelling, as well as faces for when they're hit and stuff. So a lot of the characters speaking is just them flapping their mouth super fast, transitioning from that frowning expression to the yelling expression. And with the idle poses, you can tell the development team really was rushed to try and push out this game, as the characters do have poses in these cutscenes, yes, but none of them have like idle breathing animations or anything. So a lot of the time it's just a bunch of lifeless people all standing around in a circle, like not moving at all. The only thing that really saves most of these scenes from being completely devoid of life is the voice acting. I decided to play this game with the English dub voice actors, and they all absolutely kill it. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but pretty much every voice actor gives 110% to all their deliveries, especially some like Goku, Gohan, and Frieza. Really good stuff that pretty much ended up being the only reason I didn't just spam skip throughout the entirety of the story mode. Moving on, it is criminal how much story is missed in some of these characters. Like, Piccolo doesn't have his Tournament of Power arc, Trunks doesn't have his Cell Saga arc, or the biggest victim here, Vegeta literally not having a single story beat from the entirety of Super. This is definitely a big problem, but I'm almost sort of glad these things aren't in there, because the story mode is definitely not short as it is. It took me roughly 20-ish hours to beat. but the gameplay in the story, which we'll get to, gets extremely repetitive after a while. So maybe the developers knew that the story gameplay was repetitive, and then made a decision to just not include the character story. It's definitely not because the developers had to rush to get this games on shelves instead of being given an extra 6 months to polish everything. No way. It sort of sucks that the story mode is really mid, but I really don't have that big of a problem with it as some others might. Because there are so many Dragon Ball games that just already told a story, so we didn't really need another game to just retell it for the 50th time now. However, this is a little bit disappointing though, because the story modes that you can clear aren't all completely linear. Some of the fights you can do have separate completion goals, which can lead you down new paths, letting you experience completely new spin-off story beats for each character. These new story beats are definitely the highlight of the story mode, and are all pretty damn cool if you get to go into them with zero spoilers. Which was impossible because before the game was even released, some big Twitter account just posted spoilers to every single one with zero warning or anything, but that's fine, I'm not salty about it. Can't you see that I'm not salty about it? However, saying these are the highlight of the story mode sort of feels like that one SpongeBob meme with the roller coaster. Because it's still not exactly groundbreaking stuff. A lot of the what ifs play it pretty safe and by the books, with them ranging from barely being new stuff out of 10 to being, wow, this is sort of cool out of 10. With only one outlier being genuinely actually good stuff. While there's lots of branching pathways throughout the story, most of them end up just going into a one-off story section where the narrator just says that the gang won unexpectedly. But each character has at least one story that's an entire branching storyline, and I'm going to go through each of them now, in order from my least favorite to my most favorite. Starting with 8th place, Jiren. So Jiren's story mode in its entirety is the smallest one, which is understandable as he is literally only in the Tournament of Power arc, so there wasn't really anything else they could do with him. The same goes for his what if. So you get the choice of, instead of dealing with the enraged Kale, you can just not involve yourself with this, and then if you win the final fight against Universe 7, you know, against Goku and the gang, you get the finale of Jiren wishing on the Super Dragon Balls to resurrect the other universes, wanting to fight Goku again. A lot of these new storylines are pretty much just, what if this character won instead of losing? Which is fine in some cases, like, I don't really see what else they could have done with Jiren, with the way their current story mode system is. Like, it would have been awesome to maybe get some stuff of Jiren training before the Tournament of Power, like going on a mission with the Pride Troopers or something, or even maybe a more in-depth look at his childhood, but I don't know. So, Jiren's is in last place, just because his what if and just his character in general are just a little bit boring, but honestly, I don't know what else they could have done with this. 7th place, Goku Black. Black's story segment suffers from a lot of the same problems that Jiren's does, in that it's really short, and there's not really a lot they could do with it. It would have been really cool if there was a whole story section based on the Gohan Black what if. Like, maybe Black's story starts with him killing Gowasu, getting the Super Dragon Balls, and then you get the choice of either choosing to steal Goku's body or Gohan's body. Pretty much every fight in this segment has a what if, being just if you win the fight, you get a little PowerPoint slide of either Goku Black or Zamasu being all triumphant and shit. The main what if story though plays out with Black and Zamasu choosing not to fuse and dealing with Vegeta and Trunks as just the two of them. I don't really know what else to say here, honestly. If it wasn't for the fact that Goku Black and Zamasu look heckin' awesome looking in this game, this probably would have been below Jiren's. 6th place, Piccolo. So other than the fact that this doesn't cover any of the super content or OG Dragon Ball, Piccolo's story is pretty serviceable, but incredibly boring. There's only 2 variations of Piccolo in this game, I'm pretty sure, so his combat gets incredibly repetitive fast, even more so than most of the others. The what ifs definitely carry his segment though. It's pretty much him taking up the mantle of Gohan's teacher again during the Android/Cell saga, rather than Goku training him. This one's cool because we get to see some nice character moments and development between Gohan and Piccolo, where we get to actually teach Gohan whether to focus on training his might or training his might. Goku still ends up dying in the end though, but Gohan ends up killing Cell for Masenko rather than a Kamehameha. I could easily see Piccolo's segment jumping up in the chart if he just had more story moments with some more variety in his character moves. Like, imagine a DLC 1 where we get an expansion of his story with the superhero stuff. Could be pretty cool, I'm just saying. 5th place, Vegeta. If we ignore the utter disrespect Vegeta received on his story saga, the actual what ifs are pretty good. He has two main ones. Starting with the first one, this involves Trunks and Vegeta training to defeat Cell, where they actually bond closer and decide together that Super Trunks and Super Vegeta are inferior transformations and should just train their regular Super Saiyan instead. This involves them taking down Perfect Cell together with a father-son final flash. Secondly, this storyline is what if Vegeta decided to not let himself get controlled by Babidi, with it ending with Vegeta finally getting to fight Goku one-on-one, and winning. These are both incredibly solid what-ifs, especially the first one in the Cell Saga. I like seeing Vegeta's bond with Trunks get even stronger through their training, and it's really cool playing as Vegeta and seeing him, actually win for once. But that being said, if Vegeta's storyline actually covered Super content, imagine some of the cool what-ifs we could have gotten, like him going Super Saiyan God against Beerus instead of Goku, or him beating Golden Frieza instead, or even him going up against and beating Jiren. I was going to also mention we could get a what-if of him defeating Hit instead, but none of the storylines actually cover that part of the story, purely because the development team just didn't have enough time to make an arena for that map for Universe 7 versus Universe 6, so they literally just couldn't make those parts of the game. 4th place, Frieza. Another sort of short story segment, mostly because Frieza spends a lot of time, well, dead, but this is made up by quite a decent amount of what-if segments. You have one where Frieza manages to beat Goku and Namek without having to go full power, Frieza managing to beat both Blue Goku and Vegeta, and probably the most entertaining what-if out of all of them, a 4-choice option of Frieza taking his Frieza Force into the Tournament of Power, being able to choose from Cooler, King Cold, Zarbon and Dodoria, and of course, the Ginyu Force. The Ginyu Force one is especially funny, and to be honest, so are the other 3. It's funny seeing Frieza bicker with Cooler, or King Cold gassing up his son. Like I said before, Vegeta probably would have taken his 4th place spot over Frieza if his story segment wasn't so disappointing. But that's not to discredit Frieza's what-ifs. They are all perfectly serviceable, feel in character, and offer some of the most entertaining character moments. 3rd place, Goku. Goku has an abundance of what-ifs, and I don't really want to go over them all here, but Goku has a lot of these what-ifs, and a lot of them are actually pretty high quality. He has one of the longest branching storylines, starting with him surviving the fight against Raditz, to him turning Super Saiyan against Greater Vegeta, and then defeating the Frieza Force when they invade Earth. There's a few other what-ifs that are scattered about as well, like getting to fight Super Saiyan Vegeta on Namek, fighting Android 17 instead of training in the Time Chamber. Just Goku's storyline altogether easily feels the most fleshed out and the least rushed. And also, Goku has plenty of variations of himself to play as well, so the actual gameplay felt the least repetitive. But that also might be just because he was the first character, so the game wasn't feeling stale yet. The game starts with this massive what-if, and it sort of set my expectations for the future what-ifs pretty high, because only like 2 of them are better than this one in my opinion, and shockingly, these 2 belong to the 2 characters I haven't talked about yet. Also, it is an absolute crime that we didn't get a Gohan and Goku fusion in the Buu arc. This is like the #1 what-if that literally everyone wants, and normally I wouldn't be that surprised that we didn't get it, because there's no way they're going to make a whole new character for a what-if segment, but this literally happens, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. 2nd place, Trunks. Even though this story segment literally just doesn't cover the entirety of the Android Saga, Cell Saga, or anything with future Gohan, the what-if segments are actually really good. It covers the idea of future Trunks, instead of going home after beating Zamasu, he stays in the present for a bit and trains with Piccolo, Gohan, and Vegeta. This eventually leads into him joining the Tournament of Power, and this arc explores some really interesting character dynamics, like Trunks learning that it's selfish to only want to fix his timeline rather than save the other universes with the Super Dragon Balls, or him having to work together with Android 17 and 18 in order to win. Maybe I'm just a little bit biased because both Gohan and Trunks are my favorite characters in Dragon Ball, but I thought Trunks' what-if was incredibly good. It probably helped a lot that Trunks was like the only major what-if that I wasn't spoiled on, but it feels like this is what I want in terms of creativeness for a what-if, and I wish some of the other characters explored more interesting dynamics like this one does. With how good Trunks is though, I can't help but think how cool it would have been if we got a what-if of him saving future Gohan, and then bringing him to the past with him for like the Cell Saga. 1st place, Gohan. Gohan's entire story section, what-ifs and all, is easily the best one in the game. Yeah, it doesn't cover the very start of his story, but that's easily the most boring part of Gohan's story, so I'm not that upset that it doesn't cover it. But we're talking about the what-ifs here, and oh my god, Gohan's blows the rest of the way so easily. They're all in their pretty much own tier. He has a few, some with like really long branching storylines, but they all basically followed a plot point of what if Gohan locked the fuck in and actually trained. This results in a few things like him outsmarting Boo, defeating Golden Frieza, and a few others. However, this isn't it, as due to a reaction of him continuing his training, Zamasu decides to steal Gohan's body rather than Goku's, giving us Gohan Black. This Gohan Black storyline is so unexpected and so good. It's so good that it just makes all the other what ifs pale in comparison. It sort of makes me mad to think about, because they had the balls to do a what if like this that is genuinely super cool and out there, and then other characters just get such boring stuff. This what if even has little details, like Merge Zamasu having less hair due to Gohan being the base rather than Goku. I can only imagine how cool Gohan's story would have been if Beast was already in the game. Like, imagine him going Beast Gohan against Merge Zamasu. Holy moly, that would have been awesome. This whole what if feels like the best one purely because it actually is a what if, whereas most of the others more just feel like alternatives to the story, not really changing or adding stuff to the overall story structure. Not to say that they're all bad, because they're not. Most characters all have at least one pretty solid what if, but it's sorta extremely obvious what character stories got the most development time here. Before we move on to the gameplay of the story mode, do you remember how just a little bit ago I explained that the story presented with like 50% PowerPoint slides and 45% of awkward cutscenes? Well, I want to quickly talk about that last 5% now. So, very rarely, like, I think most character stories only get one, maybe two, something called a sparking episode will happen. These are fully mocap animated, fully voice acted, dynamic cutscenes, and these are what the story should have been. These are all extremely well done and entertaining to watch. They present animations completely unique to these scenarios alone. It's clear that these were the original vision for the game, but time constraints led to very few of these actually being made, which is just tragic. This is what I'm talking about when I say this game could have been the perfect Dragon Ball game, because I personally would have waited an extra 6 months if that meant we could get that 5% ratio of sparking episodes up to like 20 or 25%. So to talk about the gameplay side of the story mode now, it's not great. So everyone knows that on launch day, the first few fights were criminally hard, like great at Vegeta or even the Ginyu Force fight in Goku's first What If. But these fights were mainly hard because everyone sucked at the game, including me. But notice now that no one complains anymore, because after you spend an hour or so in the training range, it becomes sort of obvious how to brick the AI. So firstly, the AI in this game does a really fun thing of input reading. Wow, that's so engaging. If you don't know what this is, pretty much the game reads your input, so as soon as you do something like throw a key blast, the AI will react immediately and dash at you. However, this input reading is also the AI's biggest weakness, as most of the time, they won't know what to do if you just stand there and do nothing, mainly charging ki. Basically, the AI combat boils down to you doing nothing but charging ki to go into sparking mode, unloading an entire combo and then using your ultimate move, then, while the enemy is recovering from this, charge your ki and repeat till you win. Anyone who completed the story mode can tell you how repetitive and boring this gets, and it works for the entire story mode. Even Jiren, who is meant to be the hardest, can still get cheesed by just following this mechanic. Also, a lot of story fights have the characters gain stupid amounts of health, so some of these fights are just minutes of doing the same thing over and over again, and this is especially bad when you're playing certain character stories where the character you're playing just has really little variance in their kit, like Piccolo and Jiren. There are multiple story beats that branch off into two paths, and you have to do something slightly different to achieve this path, but it's usually just always win the fight in less than a minute. Sometimes they actually do play with cool conditions though, like once, one of Goku's stories split, and to achieve the other path, you had to reflect a Crusher Ball from Jeice. I will mention that you can actually equip items onto your character you're playing in the story to make the fights easier, but to do this you have to completely exit the story menu, go to character customization, add the items, and then go all the way back. And if you aren't playing this game installed on an SSD, this can take up to like 2 minutes or more, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot of downtime doing nothing but navigating menus. And I felt like I was just better doing the fight without the items, as I thought it would be faster than just navigating menus all the time. I will say though, on a positive note, the music is pretty dang freaking good in this game. I'll talk about it more in the aesthetics part of the video, but know now, music very, very good. So in conclusion for the story section of gameplay, the simplest way to sum it up is that it just feels underbaked or uncompleted. That's not to say it's all bad, because you can see the glimmers of hope sporadically across this part of the game, especially in some of the what ifs. The story being not up to par wouldn't have been that much of an issue. As I said before, other Dragon Ball games have done it better, and this is also a fighting game, so the focus should be on gameplay. However, this game has acquired a pretty significant player base, and I feel a good majority want to avoid PvP with a 10-meter pole, which is completely valid by the way, so having the story be boring / repetitive doesn't really give the best gameplay for the offline Andes. Of course, there is still one more offline gameplay mode, which we're going to talk about now. This is definitely the mode that's going to give the game a pretty solid life cycle, and for good reason. This mode is awesome, and it's definitely my favorite of the 3 core game modes. Gameplay wise though, it's pretty much the exact same as the story. Honestly, there isn't too much to talk about in this section that I didn't already cover in the story part of this video, but there are definitely a few things, so let's talk about them real quick. As the name suggests, instead of just doing normal story events, all the content here is made by the players using the game's level creation system. And this creator is pretty damn expansive. Saying you could make literally anything is overselling the mode a little bit, but it's not that far off it to be honest. This has resulted in a massive catalogue of custom battles to already be made, even though the game hasn't been out for that long. And just playing through some of the top rated ones, they're all really entertaining. A lot of the awkwardness from the story mode doesn't really carry over to the custom battles because a lot of them are trying to be funny / entertaining. So the stiff cutscenes really play into it instead of just taking away from the experience. Also, a lot of these events people make use the most random characters, so the variety in each of these battles is super high, unlike the story mode. The only thing the editor is really missing, to be honest, is just letting you straight up type what you want to put into these battles, but letting the players do that is a bad idea for obvious reasons. Most of these fights actually have interesting conditions as well during the fight. Like when units get to a certain amount of HP, they'll trigger another cutscene and maybe swap into a new fighter or even transform. Very few times while playing these custom events did they feel like shoddily put together. Like, most of these feel like they were made by the dev team, which is just to say that the level creator they made is pretty dang good. I don't really have a ton else to say about this part of the game, as it's not really that offensively bad in any areas, except maybe the actual gameplay being pretty much the exact same as the story, but I talked about that already. This mode is probably what's going to keep the game afloat for some time to come, as this mode has a lot of charm to it, and it's more consistent in the content that it delivers, as stuff like PvP can get extremely stale extremely fast, with you just fighting the same fighters over and over and over again. Speaking of PvP, let's move on to the next section of the video so we can talk about it. So technically this section of the game is actually a lot more than just PvP. You got player versus CPU, CPU versus CPU, training mode, tournaments, you know, the whole shebang. But PvP, mainly the ranked mode, is the main meat and potatoes of the game, so that's what I'm going to talk about. I will quickly mention this though, that there is actually an unranked online mode, but for whatever reason, someone made the genius decision to not allow you to just queue unranked. You have to find an empty room and then find the person that's waiting in the room and fight them. It's just super jank, and I don't understand why they did it when there's a perfectly fine queue system that works. Okay, so the ranked PvP mode, it is sort of a mixed bag, to be honest. At its absolute best, it is some of the best fighting game gameplay ever, but at its worst, it's just straight up miserable sometimes. So there's 2 ranked modes you can queue up for, DP battle and single battles. Let's talk about DP first, as I think it's the worst of the 2. So the way DP battles works is that you're allotted 15 DP points, and every character in the game has a certain amount of DP points they're worth, so you have to build the best team possible with the budget you're allowed. In theory, this is perfectly serviceable. It promotes team variety, lets you find cool combinations of characters, lets you use multiple characters you might personally like, and so on. However, since this is ranked, people like to, you know, win. Which is completely valid, by the way. Winning in video games is fun. I have way more fun in video games when I'm winning instead of losing. However, this leads to people creating teams with sole focuses of being incredibly annoying / unfun to fight against, or teams designed specifically to do nothing but time you out and win off remaining HP. Obviously, anyone that was playing a few weeks ago knows about the Yajirobe situation, where a free-cost human was dominating the ranked ladder and was far better than characters such as literal gods. The team did a good job of patching this out fast, but still, these team comps I mentioned make for incredibly unengaging gameplay for the other side, as it's not that fun to fight against teams that solely focus on defense, or having to fight giant characters which are just so autistic to fight, only for your opponent to end up having 3 more characters under their belt still. Additionally, for a mode that has team creation as its main focus, there is very little synergy between most characters, and I feel like most of the time you're picking a character purely for their DP cost, rather than actually, picking someone to help support the weaknesses of one of your other characters. I will say though, DP battles can lead to some high octane moments, like switching out your character just in time before they die, but even stuff like this is sometimes cut short due to the clunkiness of the controls sometimes, which I will talk about in a second. You do definitely see more variety in this mode though, which you don't get to see in single battles. Like, I had one match where I was destroying my opponent, and then he just pulled out Krillin, and this man was an absolute demon on this character, and he reverse swept me with Krillin, and I just couldn't help but be impressed by it. And this sort of thing you just straight up wouldn't see in singles battles, because that's just not the meta for that mode. So singles battle is pretty obvious, exact same as DP battle, except without the DP limit, and you can only bring in one character, and this character can be absolutely anyone out of the 180 caster characters or whatever it is. From Raccoon to even Mastered UI Goku, it's all fair game. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this is a ranked mode and people like winning, and the dev team definitely have their favorites for which characters are stronger than others. Which is how it should be, by the way. It would be weird if someone like Raccoon was on the exact same playing level as Mastered UI. But because of this, you pretty much only see the same few characters in singles, mainly Fusions, Jiren, Beerus, and UI Goku. Many top tier characters are chosen by how good their abilities are, with the best characters having instant spark abilities, which immediately puts a character in sparking mode, or stuff like After Image Strike, which is the ability to dodge all damage for 15 seconds straight. I'm not joking, by the way, this is an actual ability in a fast-paced fighting game. But the biggest factor that sets these characters apart from most of the others is their HP level. Most characters only have about 3 bars of HP, whereas these characters I just mentioned have upwards of 4. This in my opinion is the biggest factor in who you choose in ranked single battles, because why would I choose a character that just straight up has less HP than my opponents, meaning I'm just at a complete disadvantage because I didn't pick a meta character. And like, it's a pretty dang significant disadvantage. That HP is the difference of like one good combo. So this ends up being the absolute opposite of DP battle and having little to no variety in its gameplay. Especially since in my experience, I kept facing the same people in singles battle over and over and over and over again, even though I never once challenged anyone to a rematch. This whole meta thing isn't really the biggest issue for me personally, because I found Merge the Master to be a pretty fun character that still fit the bill of being a meta character. But like, say someone is the biggest Oob fan, and all they want to do is play Oob in singles. That guy's going to be up against so many Mastered UIs and Super Saiyan 4 Gogetas, and most likely will be getting his ass kicked most of the time, because he's just at a disadvantage for using a worse character. I really don't understand why there isn't an option in singles battles to match you up against someone who's using the same DP level character as the one you're using. So that way all the meta users will only fight against other meta users, which is pretty much what happens now anyway, and people who want to use the less good characters will only go up against other people who are using less good characters. Personally, I think single battles are still the better of the two, because if you get an annoying opponent, the battle will be over fast and you can just move on. Even though there's a good chance you'll just queue into them again anyways, and I feel like there's more skill expression in singles, because you can't just use cringe characters and time out your opponent, it's just straight hands, and about 50% of the fight is decided solely off your own skill level and how well you performed. So I'm going to talk about the gameplay now instead of just giving it its own section, as the ranked mode is probably the best place to talk about the gameplay, as this is the area you're going to need it the most. So I briefly mentioned it, but the gameplay is really good. It has an incredibly steep learning curve, and the training mode only does an okay job at explaining and teaching the mechanics, but it still is really satisfying to learn, and you can definitely feel yourself getting better at the game over time. Like, some of the stuff I can do now was stuff I literally thought I would never be able to do at the start of the game. It is really hard to recommend this game though because of the super steep learning curve, because the combat either clicks and you get why people play the game, or the combat just doesn't make sense and you're just getting your ass beat. And this game is specifically super unfun when you're doing nothing but getting pummeled, especially sometimes because you feel like it's just not your fault, because this game is surprisingly unresponsive or just straight up clunky sometimes. The most infamous example of this is when you're holding right trigger to open up your special move menu, and you're spamming circle to use your move, and your character just stands there spamming counter instead of using the move, which then gives your opponent enough time to recover and evade attack. Or sometimes when you switch characters or get hit by an attack, your camera will just unlock from the opponent, even though they're right in front of you. So that means they can just use their instant spark and you can't throw key blasts at them or anything because you're just not locked on. Like, holy shit, I'm actually getting physically angry talking about some of this stuff. I cannot stress enough how infuriating this game is sometimes, with how much stuff like this happens. Like, almost every PvP match I played, there was at least something that fucked up that legit costed me, like, upwards of a full bar of HP. These moments are easily the biggest blight on the gameplay, and why I believe they'll be 100% be fixed sometime in the future, it's sort of insulting how many of them are in the game at this point in time. One gameplay mechanic that's been talked a lot about the community so far is the Vanish Wars that happen in pretty much every fight, where sometimes players that aren't low ranked can get into these moments where they just continuously vanish each other's attacks for like upwards of 20 to 30 seconds at a time. This isn't exactly the most skillful thing ever, nor is it that engaging or fun either. Now, I'm not exactly the best player, nor am I very high rank, but I've watched plenty of high rank gameplay, and majority of the time, it's almost never the play to use any of your ultimates or like special abilities, unless they have zero travel time or are unblockable. And with how beautiful this game is, it sucks that there's almost never a reason to beam flash or anything really, and you're always better off just using your key to vanish or combo. I feel like I've been pretty negative so far, so let me just say, when the gameplay works, it really heckin' works. I haven't played many fighting games, so I don't have a lot to compare it to, but I know fun gameplay when I see it, and this is definitely some really fun stuff. I just think there's so many little things that add up over time and that end up creating some really janky experiences. I'm bringing this up again, but it feels like a lot of these things I mentioned wouldn't be a problem if the dev team just had another 6 to 8 months to help iron out some things. Hopefully, in the future, some of these things will get fixed, and also hopefully they can add some fun events to help spice up the flow of gameplay. Like maybe certain weekends you can only use 2 DP characters in single battles or something like that. And I have faith in these developers. I think the game was, is, and will be in good hands, because there is generally some top tier stuff here that I've talked about, and that I'm going to continue talking about now in our next segment of the video. This is where the game really starts to set itself apart from the competition, because this game is heckin' gorgeous. Even with such an expansive roster of characters, each character themselves feels incredibly unique from one another, and manages to capture the essence of each character from the anime absolutely flawlessly. Yes, there are some characters that translate to the art side of dev team has chosen better than others. For example, Perfect Cell is pretty much, ironically, perfect visually. He straight up doesn't look like a 3D model and looks exactly from the anime. Then there's some others which still look pretty dang good, but not up to scratch as some of the others. For example, I think Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta looks just a wee bit off. He's still like an 8 or 9 out of 10 3D model, but something is just off. I think his face looks a little bit off or something, I'm not entirely sure. With majority of these character models being so amazing, it makes sense that the idle screens and the menus also look incredible. These menus feature a wide array of characters all chilling together and interacting, and there's actually some decent and expressive animations here, unlike the story mode. I will say, since there's so many moving parts in some of these menus, this would result in some pretty egregious load times at some points, but swapping the game from a hard drive to an SSD helps solve some of these problems. Quickly speaking about some of the menus themselves though, I'd say about half of them are completely serviceable, but a lot of them are sort of annoying to navigate. Mainly the story mode menu, it's so clunky to try and navigate that, and it takes a significant amount of time to go through it if you're trying to find just a specific node. Also, the shop menu wasn't that amazing either, it's just a little bit cluttered and hard to read. And also the room system for unranked PvP sucks, but I talked about that already. While there aren't that many maps in the games, the ones that are actually there all look really good and are all very faithful to the source material. The only one that's a little bit weird looking is the Tournament of Power stage. It's like way too small compared to the one in the anime. And I sort of get why they did it for gameplay reasons, but it makes the area feel pretty claustrophobic sometimes. And yes, while all the stage destruction events for some of the maps are really cool, they can get repetitive really fast, and they like take a bit of time out of the match. It's one of the reasons I try to avoid queuing Planet Namek or World Tournament when I'm playing PvP. I wish there were actually more maps in the game though, and again, another thing that probably I wouldn't have a problem with if the game just had some more time to cook in the oven. The VFX team really put 110% into pretty much each and every character. I've done a little work in making VFX stuff before, so I can vouch for how much hard work must have gone into this aspect of the game. Everything from the auras, to the beams, to the orbs of power, pretty much all special attacks look spectacular. Even some attacks like the Kamehamehas, which you would imagine become generic between characters, actually aren't. Most of the Gokus all have various different forms of the Kamehameha that still manage to look independent from other forms. But it's not just the key attacks, most of the physical specials are all really dynamic and fluid as well. Even if sometimes they do like a little impact due to no camera shake, or just the attack itself being straight up like just a single kick or something, but these are pretty far and few between. Also, a lot of the transformations in this game all look insane, like 10 out of 10. The only ones that aren't really on this level are some of the Super Saiyan transformations, mostly because all the characters use the exact same Super Saiyan transformation, so it gets a little bit repetitive after a while, and also Jiren going into full power. This shit just looks straight up unfinished. I don't even know how it's in the state it is now that the game is not only launched, but it's also been out for a while. It looks like horrendously bad. Also, most of the D transformations look pretty boring, but like, they're D transformations. They probably weren't meant to look cool. Moving on to maybe the most surprising aspect of the game that is shockingly good is the music. Good god, does this soundtrack go exceptionally hard. I went into this game with expectations of good combat and beautiful visuals, which we mostly got, but one thing that I didn't even think about was the music. I just assumed we would be getting a serviceable soundtrack with maybe some songs from the anime, but dang, this soundtrack is amazing. There were multiple times throughout my playthrough where I started physically bopping my head up and down to the song. This music is honestly easily the most underrated part of the entire game. It sort of sounds like a weird comparison, but a lot of these tracks really sound like they're straight out of games like Elden Ring or other heavy hitters like that. For the many shortcomings that Sparking Zero has, the OST is definitely not one of them. So, wrapping up before we head into my conclusion, the visuals of this game are easily some of the best we've ever seen in the anime game genre, and honestly, it could be in discussion for best visuals in modern gaming as well. Alright, let's move on to my final thoughts. So, is this the perfect anime game ever made? Hell no. But, is this the perfect Dragon Ball game ever made? Still, no, but I think it's pretty dang close to it. I think if you ask me this question again in a year's time, or even 6 months to be honest, I reckon the game will be in a healthier position and also have patched out a lot of the issues I mentioned in this video, being the clunkiness of the combat, the lack of maps, and just more content overall for both offline and online players. Would I prefer that the game would have just been delayed for this amount of time and then released without any of these issues? Of course I would, but obviously the dev team wasn't allowed to do that. With the higher ups at Bandai needing their next super yacht, they rushed the game out. But I have faith in the team. They're clearly competent devs with a love for the Dragon Ball series, creating some absolutely stunning visuals that are both stylistic and faithful to the source material, while also creating some fighting gameplay that, when it isn't super defensive or unresponsive, is genuinely super duper fun. It's a lot of these little issues that make it hard for me to recommend this game to anyone that isn't a diehard Dragon Ball fan, but I truly think this is one of those games that's only going to get better with time, and it's going to become an absolute steal when you can buy it along with all its DLC for like half price. Anyway, that's been my review. Thanks for watching, subscribe and stuff. Okay, see ya, bye!